Hello, I'm hoping this finds you well. Our church is wanting to have communion, but we're in COVID, and so what do? How do you get unleavened bread? So we thought we'd put together a quick little video on how to make unleavened bread at home. I'm trying to use things you may have around the house so you don't have to go buy a bunch of stuff. But first, let's go over what we need to have. You need to have a sheet to bake it on, a cookie sheet, a baking sheet, a bread pan, really doesn't matter, something to bake on. If you're using a disposable pan, like the aluminum ones you get at the grocery store, I would do double thickness because it's fairly thin and you don't want things to burn. But a cookie sheet of some kind, something to bake on. You will need an oven, so hopefully you have one of those. You're going to need salt, not a lot. Any kind of salt will do. It can be, kosher salt. It can be sea salt. It doesn't matter. Just some kind of salt. Put this here so you can see. You're going to need some oil. Again, doesn't matter what kind. This is canola oil, but you could have olive oil. You could have corn oil. It doesn't matter. Whatever oil you've got in the house will work. So you need some oil. And then you're going to need flour. Now, unleavened bread for an Adventist service generally is made with whole wheat flour, pastry wheat flour, or mixed pastry wheat and white. Pastry wheat is hard to come across to get. Your grocery store will have regular wheat flour. Pastry wheat, you can find it at like Whole Foods, but it's not necessary. So we're going to make it out of regular wheat flour. I'm going to mix it half and half with regular unbleached white flour. It makes a better tasting unleavened bread, but if you use all wheat, it's fine. Unleavened bread that we use for communion is almost like a wheat thin. It's the same type of cracker. All right, so we're going to have that. And then you're going to need some water. And since I'm not by my sink, I have a little container of water. So not a big deal there. Need to have that. And then I have a bowl to mix in. Any container will work, about this size. If you don't have any bowls, you can use a Ziploc bag as your bowl. That works fine. You just need a container to put everything in. All right? So we have a bowl. I like to have 2 other containers that I can put things in. If you're making this with your children, they can help you, but it helps to have multiple containers, and you'll see why in a minute. I'm just using 2. These are jelly jars that I'm using that are like glasses. I'm going to want a fork. I want a 1/2 cup measure. This is a dry measure, not a measuring cup like you would put liquid in. It's really hard to get accurate measurement in a liquid measuring cup. These you can get at the dollar store. These usually come in a stack of like 4 or 5. 1/2 cup just is one of them. If you look at it, it'll have like a half written on the end here for a 1/2 cup. So 1/2 cup measure. And then you're going to need some measuring spoons. Again, the dollar store will have them. You can't use a regular spoon from your silverware set. That won't be the right measure. And this is baking, not cooking. And having the right measures makes a difference on the outcome. All right? It's more like chemistry class. And so you're going to need a tablespoon. That's the one that says tablespoon on it, or I'll have a big T, a capital letter T. You're going to need that one. And you're going to need the one, I took mine apart so you could see. This is a 1/2 teaspoon, okay? This has the little t, all right? 1/2 teaspoon. So you need one of those. I don't need the other 2. So those are all the things I need to make unleavened bread. Now, my oven is turned on to 400 degrees. So it's warming up because it takes it a while to get to that temperature. So now let's make the bread. Doesn't take very long. You might want to practice this or do it with your kids. Unless it's blessed, it's just a cracker, okay? You're making like a wheat thin. Once it is blessed and you've used it in communion, then it's something else, okay? Then it's very special. But for practice, you could just make the crackers, all right? So, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to measure out my wheat flour. And I'm going to need a 1/2 cup of wheat flour. And I don't know if you noticed, but I'm smoothing this out. You don't want it over the top. You want it to be even with the top. Okay? See, it's even with the top. It's not mounded up. It's flat. So that's one of those. Again, half a cup, even at the top, not mounded up. Put that in there. Now, let's say you bought flour and you don't use flour at home hardly ever or never. Okay, flour does go rancid after a time. If you keep it in the freezer, it'll keep about a year. So, you know, it's not something that you have to use right away. If you keep it out, it starts, especially wheat with wheat flour with the wheat germ in it, will start to go rancid in about 4 months, unless you keep it in the freezer, and then you've got it for about a year. So, if you don't bake ever or hardly ever, get the little bags, but keep it in the freezer and make these once in a while. They're really quite fun. Okay, so I've got those, and I'm going to mix it up. So my wheat and my white flour are getting mixed up. I want it to be about the same color all the way through. I don't want it to have parts of it white and parts of it tan from the wheat, okay? Now, the next part is measuring your liquids. I measure them in 2 containers in case I mismeasure. Especially if you're doing this with kids, they sometimes, oops, got too much. Well, you can't take it back out. So if you measure it first into 1 container and then put them together, then you know. So I need 5 tablespoons of water. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so that's my water. And then I take my other jar or container. It can be a jar, it can be anything. Just need a container that's small enough to hold it so it doesn't get lost in the bottom. I need 4 of oil. And I'm going to post the recipe at the end, all right? So you don't have to worry about that. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. But if your children get a little ambitious and they pour a little too much, just start again. Pour it back in the jar. You haven't gotten anything else dirty. It hasn't mixed with anything else. You can pour it back in. You can start again. That's the reason for having the 2 containers, just in case kids get a little bit anxious. Now, salt. You want 1/2 teaspoon of salt. You could use as little as 1/4. I wouldn't use none. I think you need a little bit of the salt to give the unleavened bread a flavor. I'm going to put it over here in my dry ingredients. See if I can show you here. All right, mix that up. Now, I'm going to mix my oil and my water together. And then I'm going to beat it up. Notice how it gets kind of milky looking, kind of white and milky. You want it very milky. Once you think you got it pretty well mixed up, you quick, all at once, dump it into your flour mixture. And then you take your fork, and what you're trying to do is get all the water absorbed into the wheat and the flour, the 2 kinds of flour. And it forms a dough. Now, a lot of people think, oh, we're making bread, we're going to need this. No, you don't. When you knead flour, it forms gluten. The gluten is what makes bread spongy. Well, you don't want your unleavened bread spongy. You want it like a cracker. So you don't want the gluten to start get activated. So you just make it into a ball. Make sure it's all incorporated. And then you get your baking sheet out. Get that out of the way. And you dump it in here. All right. So, here's my lump. Now, you can pat it out flat. Let's see if I can get this in the camera. Here we go. Get it out flat. Or, I've got a soda can here that I've washed. And I could use that as a rolling pin. That makes it easier than patting it out to get it even. Because it turns out, if it's very uneven when you cook it, some parts will get done and some parts will be raw. So you want it as even as you can. Now, I've seen this done where people put the dough inside a Ziploc bag and roll it in the Ziploc bag. This amount of dough is a little bit too much for a quart Ziploc. A gallon, just don't fill it to the corners, okay? But that's just one more thing to use. I find this just as easy. So you're going to roll this till it's about 1/8 of an inch thick. Not very thick at all. It's quite thin. And our edges are a little soft. Notice I didn't grease the bottom of the pan. There's plenty of oil in the unleavened bread. It shouldn't stick. I can even this up, make it a little squarer or not. It's totally up to you. If you do it in a Ziploc bag, you end up with square edges. That's good. And now, you can bake this as is, and you have one big cracker. So you might want to take something and score it to make divisions, because it'll break along those lines. So you end up with little square crackers. I'm not being very precise. If you were doing this for communion at church, some people take a ruler and they measure it exactly right. They make sure all their edges are square. I like the spontaneity of doing it this way. Now, if you're making these for crackers for home, just for snacking, then I would salt them a little bit. And then I put them in the oven for more than 12 minutes. But it depends how thick you rolled it. If it just starts to turn brown, and when you tap it, it feels done. It sounds done. Here's one that I did earlier. Okay, they're going to look like this. Notice how they're browner. These were thinner than these. You notice? I didn't roll this out evenly. These are very thin. Very thin. Okay, they're about the thickness, maybe 1/16 of an inch. So they're real crispy. They're quite good. One of them is gone. I ate it. These over here are the 1/8 inch, which is what your normal size would be. They're also crispy. They're done through. These didn't burn yet, but if I'd left it in too much longer, they probably would have burned. So at about 12, 14 minutes, I would check it, look at it, see how brown they are. If they're not brown at all, put them back in. If they, when you tap them, if they sound like they're done, your finger, your nail doesn't go in, then they're probably done. I can't give you an exact time because it depends on how thick you rolled it. But about 1/8 of an inch, 15 minutes, 14, 15 minutes is usually about right at 400 degrees. I hope this helps. I think they're quite tasty. I eat them as snacks. My kids used to make this when they were like 12 years old for a Saturday night snack because it's healthy. It has no preservatives. It's a good snack. Hope to see you at church. Bye.